You're watching News at Prime. Let's bring you this conversation now. Today marks World International Anti-Corruption Day. The global problem is being blamed for the ever-rising inequality gap and injustices. In South Africa, President Cyril Ramaphosa has signed a number of laws in an effort to fight widespread graft. Let's discuss this now with Defend Our Democracy Executive Director, Zaakirah Vadi. Ms. Vadi, good evening to you and thank you very much for your time. Let's begin with how Corruption Week in South Africa is going to be observed.
Thanks so much for hosting me, and good evening to all of the listeners. Anti-Corruption Week runs from the 3rd to the 10th of December, so we're really at the tail end of the week. But today is quite important because, as you've indicated, it is International Anti-Corruption Day. And we've marked this period going to different communities in Gauteng and looking at infrastructure projects that are half finished, but millions of rands have already been put into it and they've been left abandoned. And that's really what we've been focusing on, trying to highlight localized incidences of corruption. And of course, today there was a huge conference that took place in Boksburg, where people from civil society, from government and different sectors participated, discussing what would eventually be, I think, a national anti-corruption strategy for the country.
As I mentioned in the introduction, the president signing a number of bills into law, part of which are designed to try and curb corruption. Do you think that government is doing enough on that score?
Well, I think that there has been some significant work done to deal with corruption and state capture in the country, part of which are the signing of some of these bills, changing of policies, and that's really stemming from the Zondo Commission recommendations and tracking some of those recommendations in terms of a policy framework for the country. However, I think that it doesn't meet the scale of the problem of corruption and state capture in South Africa at the moment. Those state capture networks haven't necessarily been dealt with entirely. We see networks of state capture and corruption now permeating at a localized level within municipalities, at a provincial level. And they've morphed and evolved so that they found common cause, for example, with organized crime units as well. And the problem of corruption still remains embedded within society. So more needs to be done. And I think that it can be done both from a legal perspective, but from a political accountability perspective as well.
Do you believe, Ms. Vadi, that there is a certain measure of impunity or even a brazenness in how some people are just forging ahead with making sure that they can take as much as they can, possibly before even getting caught? Do you think that the law or even the fear of going to jail has simply stopped becoming a deterrent?
Absolutely. And I think this stems from a political accountability perspective, because you have people within cabinet and within Parliament at the moment that are severely implicated in the Zondo Commission and who simply go about as if it's business as usual. We have a minister at the moment that is implicated in taking a so-called loan linked to or allegedly linked to the VBS matter, and is simply shuffled from one department to the other. So it sends a message that there isn't a sense of cracking of the whip or sense of accountability for those at a higher level. And that message then gets carried through to the public service. It gets carried through to a societal level. So it's okay then to give a cop a bribe, for example. And I think that the kind of accountability that needs to be effective from a citizen perspective as well. So as much as we call for accountability of ministers and those in cabinet, and those in public positions, at the same time, at a localized level, we need to be holding ourselves accountable to similar standards. And that means not paying a bribe when you stopped at a roadblock, for example.
Yeah, I think what you are making reference to is that the tone needs to be set from the top. And if the president has the audacity to move someone who is heavily implicated, like the minister you're making reference to, shift them merely from one department to the next, because I suppose his fear is that she may possibly either interfere with prosecutorial processes or come into direct conflict with what her department ought to do. It leads me to another crucial question in the fight against corruption, and that is the constant reminder from the president that the protection of whistleblowers is important. But at the same time, I'm not so sure whether we've gone the distance, as he likes to put it, to protect whistleblowers. Do you think that he is being honest in that regard? Is he merely paying lip service to it?
On the one hand, it is important to highlight the issues and to ensure that it's kept on the public agenda. And I think government has been talking about it. The president has been talking about it. But then we do know that there hasn't really been significant updates on improved whistleblower legislation. I know part of it was formed, part of the discussions at today's conference. But I know a number of civil society organizations that are working in this particular area have indicated that they really haven't been getting feedback on what are the updates to this bit of policy that's really required in our country at the moment. And our concern is that, one, you have the kind of traditional whistleblower, but the threats that are being made now extend to a broader base of people. So you have public servants, honest public servants. You have people who are doing investigations, whether that may be with the SIU or SARS, or in other government departments, that then also come under threat and their lives are put in danger. Recently we picketed outside SARS in solidarity with an advocate who had bullets fired into her car, very much like Babita Deokaran. And she survived that attempt, but was involved in very serious investigative work at SARS at the moment. And that's the fear, that these networks, in the way in which they've now permeated and linked up common cause with organized crime, we're now seeing perhaps issues of assassinations, construction mafias, etc. And this is a really worrying factor for the country at the moment, especially when it comes to whistleblowing.
We can't forget the private sector, because they are often the party that are accused. There's often the expression that there is a corrupter and a corruptee. And so oftentimes you find that the corruptee sits in a government department somewhere, whereas the corrupter who wanted the contract from either a department or a state-owned entity sits outside in the private sector, but wanting to have a person within. Do you think that the private sector itself has put safeguards, is doing enough to try and stop corruption from their end?
No, I don't think that that enough has been put into place. I think that within the business or organized business formations, there needs to be greater dedication towards isolating those who have been implicated in state capture and corruption. And that certainly hasn't happened. Very much like at a societal level, those who are within our communities who have been implicated in corruption need to be isolated and not sort of revered in our communities. And business really needs to do the same. But at the same time, I think that accountability for business needs to stem from outside as well. So, you can't have business people who have been implicated in state capture and corruption, who have all of the money to fight long out court battles, simply getting away with a slap on the wrist. I think it's really positive that we've seen, for instance, McKinsey now paying back or going to pay back R1 billion back to the state. But at the same time, we must emphasize that shouldn't be the end of it. There has to be prosecutions that follows. There has to be some sort of accountability. We've constantly been making the call for orange overalls, not just for people within state institutions that are involved in corruption, but from those within the business sector as well.
Yeah. Finally, as we end this conversation, I think that we can't do that holistically without talking in specific terms about the work of the National Prosecuting Authority. There are a number of interviews being done, documentaries, for example, that I watched today, compiled by fellow media colleagues. And it's honing in on the NPA and perhaps what the legacy of Shamila Batoy is going to be. Her term is coming to an end. What do you think her legacy will be?
I think that there is a positive institutional legacy in terms of changing some of the systemic issues within the NPA. It's difficult to turn around an institution that in itself was embroiled in issues related to state capture previously or alleged state capture previously. But at the same time, I think the concerning part of that legacy is the number of high-level prosecutions in relation to bigger matters of state capture and corruption. And this is really the big fish that I think needed to be caught and needed to be put in orange overalls. And the success rate there is something that does concern us. However, one thing that we do want to highlight in relation to the NPA is that the way in which the National Director of Public Prosecutions is appointed needs to be institutionalized. So previously with the appointment of Shamila Batoy, there was a sense of great transparency around the interview processes. And that's something that was really at the behest of the president. We are calling for that to be institutionalized so that any future appointment within this position, there's similar levels of transparency and public oversight over it as well.
Zaakirah Vadi, I want to thank you very much for your time, Executive Director at Defend Our Democracy, talking to us about what has been a period of anti-corruption week that has been observed, and today marking International Anti-Corruption Day.